welcome to our webinar entitled Meeting CMMC with On-Premises Servers and GCC High. My name is August, your host. We have Conrad Agramont, CEO of Agile IT, as our speaker. His expertise in cybersecurity and compliance will definitely provide valuable insights today. We highly encourage everyone to type your questions in the box, and we'll try to get to all of them at the end of today's discussion. If we run out of time, we'll be sure to reach out via email to further discuss. Okay, it looks like we're all set. Conrad, I'm passing it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining on. This has been a topic that has been coming up quite a bit with a number of customers, and hopefully today you'll get some things to take away with. There'll be we're going to set up another webinar where it gets really nerdy on some of it, but for now I think there's been a lot of questions around what is it. I have this on-premise infrastructure that I have, here I'm going to talk a lot about some of the compliance areas, some things about the different products and some guidance on them. So this is really just kind of the big overview and kind of explaining why certain areas, where would you apply them. So hopefully this just gives you an idea of what are the different pieces. And then, you can feel free to reach out to us to dig in a little bit more. One of the reasons why we kind of expect that people would be here and are looking for this is that, just like the title says, there's CMMC, and at this point, right now it's June 14, 2023, they're still in the rules making process, unless something came out this morning and I missed it, could be, but there's still a need to do an audit. And, one of the things that was good in both the elevation of CMMC directly into DoD CIO, but also the change in V2 before they went into the rules making process, which was really about simplifying it and really aligning it directly to NIST 800-171. So, but the big part of this is around maturity. I've been doing compliance for a long time, and you can't just the auditors come in, we'll just slap it in tomorrow. There's reasons why we need to have better cybersecurity stuff. I'm not going to go in and explain all those areas, but the supply chain and the DIB is being attacked pretty heavily, and so thus the need for this. But we also have a lot of customers that have made that leap. Here specifically, we talk about Microsoft 365 GCC High, and being able to leverage that to essentially, in that responsibility model, let Microsoft handle a lot of the pieces, from running your email and your files. But there's still a lot of servers that remain on premises, and some of those servers that you might have. You might say, well, they're not ready to move into the cloud. We may not ever move them into a cloud, or maybe we're going to get there eventually. So what do I need to do? Because it normally sounds like the answer is like, oh, you got files, put them into OneDrive or put them into SharePoint Online. We say the same thing too many times, but there's good reasons. Whether you're doing manufacturing, there's something that you need because of network connections. You're doing a lot of CAD drawing, a lot of files and media that you kind of need a local presence. So there's some good reasons why you may not move yet for a long time or ever at all. So what do you need to go do with this, and why even explore like this session and things we're going to go through? So hopefully you kind of get out of there. And the other kind of common scenario that we get from a lot of customers, and if you've been running these servers for a long time, it makes sense, and it's actually good that you've had these other tools and products and services so you can do your patch management and log data collection, log analytics against them. You're probably using other tools to again do the patching, inventory, because it's kind of what you've been running on. However, now that you're kind of in this mix, and there's a little bit of a different scenarios for those that have infrastructure, whether it's hosted or on premises or wherever it might be, and this all still applies if you have things in AWS. Maybe you have AWS Gov, and that's good, but we still want to align them to what's going on with the Microsoft 365 GCC High investment you already have or will have, so that you can really reduce the amount of complexity from logging. I'll get into that a little bit later on. But so you have these vendors that you have already, and maybe they work for you now, they meet the things that you've gone through an assessment with somebody else. Little disclaimer, we're on the Agile IT, we're on the implementation side of this. So there's nothing here that I can tell you, yeah, put that button on and you will for sure pass an audit. We would get our hands slapped because that's what the auditors and assessors are meant to do. But we give guidance, we pair it together. Anyhow, there's other places where the vendors that you have, love them, hate them, whatever that might be, they're just not going to service the level of requirements you're going to have for compliance, participate in audit, do the, they're great at what they do, but where does that data sit? Who accesses that data? Because if it's, related to CUI, it's like, oh, well, we're nice people, we're not going to do it. That doesn't pass audits, so, maybe that's a reason, or you're just going to want to do cost reduction. Whatever those reasons are, there's normally something here that you can start to look at as you move forward. Now, for many people, we've gone through this before. You can Google it. We'll put a link on the site, which is the Microsoft placemat for CMMC. They have a V2 preview. They call it preview because it's still in the rulemaking process. So Microsoft's trying to be good about saying, well, these are kind of the things. And it's a great tool to really go use. So I'm gonna download it to spreadsheet. You open it up. I'm going to go through a few layers just to kind of explain a couple pieces here, and then we're going to actually talk about those products here in a little bit. So one thing to note when you get the placemat, little fun fact too, if you download it in your download folder, you open it, it's like it doesn't work. You got to right click over properties and select this checkbox called unblock. If you run into it, you'll know it. And when you go to the properties for the file, you'll see it. If you copy it someplace else, it normally works out. Anyhow, it's a spreadsheet that you go into. They have great, they have a tab that's about the instructions that explains all the colorings and everything. So I'm not going to really go on that. But one little fun thing that most people miss is that in this little area that I put a red box around it, is that they have 3 different versions in there: level 1, level 2, and level 3, even though level 3 says coming soon. So just kind of ignore it, doesn't do anything for you. But if you're going to go, let's say you're here in this conversation and you feel like, I don't really need to go in GCC high. Maybe I'm going to go moderate. Anybody that's going to, if you're doing any ITAR, it's GCC high all day, all the time. If you're going to do something that requires, V2, maybe it needs FedRAMP high or moderate, you're not sure. We always say, talk to your assessors, talk to your program office, they'll tell you. So here, I'm not trying to tell you to go either way. Anyhow, if you're only trying to do level 1 and maybe do a moderate, maybe you're doing GCC high at first, you can select it. And what it'll do is you see all the boxes that are there, and they kind of target, again, this is Microsoft's recommendation of what can be applied. Now, in this case, I start off with level 1 and I unchecked everything in the enabled. Most people, when they get into this, they start hitting all the buttons there's a drop down that's specifically for some of the licenses you might get, Microsoft 365, E3, E5, and they do a lot of stuff. But for here, we're talking about infrastructure and services. This is where it'll apply to us. So same kind of thing, level 2, everything kind of disabled, just to show that, that's where we start off with. And the first thing, if we just select Azure Active Directory, you start to see a bunch of things light up. Now, you may be, say we're putting a lot of our infrastructure on there, for applications we're servicing to our customers. It might be for our business, and so maybe some of the people in our organization are going to go into GCC high, maybe all of them are going to go, whatever that might be. But Azure Active Directory is the tenant, is the identity that all of it's going to be based off of. So you can have an Azure environment. I'll talk about, well, what happens if you have multiple subscriptions and how do you manage them? I'm going to go through that here in a little bit. But as we start to turn things on, what you start to see light up here in blue is it's essentially saying that this service for Azure Active Directory is a primary service that's going to help satisfy those requirements. I'll get to a section here that starts to explain a little bit of that. And also, this is good guidance for you as you start to figure out for yourself and using the placemat, what are the things that we're going to do and what does it really tell us? I'll show a little bit about that as well. So if we just go along, turn that off, turn on the next one, which is just the multi-factor. Doesn't that work with Azure Active Directory? It sure does. You would need it. But again, just trying to isolate what does that give me in terms of possibilities. Now, what you're seeing here as well is anything's in gray says Microsoft has something for it, but you just didn't enable something for it. And again, that's why I'm kind of going one by one so you can kind of see it, and then just this is guidance on what you can do moving forward. Same thing with Azure Data Center. Normally when you go in here, this is turned on by default. I turned it off just so we can see those each ones. But part of this is look at it for the physical protection, on the PE side. This is a place where we talk about shared responsibilities. Well, when I use services in Azure, now again, in this talk, we're not talking about moving our servers into Azure, but we are talking about using Azure services. So if anything we're collecting or updating or securing or anything like that, well, where is that going? Same thing you should ask for all other vendors. If they're doing remote desktops or patch management or whatever that might be on the infrastructure side, will they meet that same requirement? Will they pass an audit? I'll be beating that up all the time. But, again, so this is one of the benefits you get, something to really think about is why even use some of these, as we move along. Same thing with Azure Portal, fun, interesting thing of what it does, because it actually is an entry point. Yes, there's APIs and there's a way to protect that too, but not getting into all that just now. So now we turn things on like log analytics in the workspace. We'll talk about this in terms of the data we start to collect from our servers, events, security events, all of those things we would want to set up a policy, which I'll talk about, in order to collect all that information. Now, again, you might have that in another thing, and we'll talk about that later on, but this is another key one. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are a couple that we went through. Same thing with Sentinel. So as we start to turn on Sentinel, again, isolating it just by itself, what are the things that it's doing? Now, some customers have never had SIEM, just learned what it is, are going to go do it. Other customers have SIEM-like type of solutions because they either cobbled it together or there's homegrown things. It's really time to move to something else. And the third part is you might already have a SIEM solution, very popular. People are using other products and services that are out there. But the big one to ask, especially because now it's getting security information, and if that security information is either one relevant to where the CY data might be, that could be a problem. But also, because these are tips of security things. Should you do the third party or not? Should you send it from Sentinel to another one? Not really, we're going to cover here. A lot of times those things go to an assessor because there's broader things in terms of, well, if it goes to a third party, who accesses it on their side, on your side? Where does it get stored? So, you kind of get the theme that we're going through here. So one thing that I wanted, so now, as we've gone through a few of them, now here in this little snapshot at the bottom is a little bit of table, because on the spreadsheet you'll see it goes all the way down the left-hand side. It's a lot of stuff and really hard to see on the screenshot. So these are the services that were enabled, and as you can see the map of what's there, of what got configured. Now, there could be more areas, but I was really trying to keep the scope in terms of the talk, and some of these areas might be around like things around like your email or the type of services that may not just apply to that unit, right? I mean, all of these pieces have to be satisfied and documented for your whole environment, but here we're just kind of really keeping the scope in terms of the servers that we have and other infrastructure. Now I'm gonna talk about the servers, but there's a lot that can be extended from your other devices that you have, whether they're SAN devices, they're smart switches, routers, local firewalls, other kind of network data that you may still want to pull in, into these services. I'll try and touch on that as I go, but that's obviously a much deeper discussion. So in there, if you scroll down, I'm going to only kind of look at a couple of these to kind of call this out. So for this particular one, in terms of the control, or the practice that they have here, so L2 3.2. The real simple description, again, it's from NIST, ensure that the actions, I'm going to read it out loud, but ensure that the actions of the individual system users can be uniquely traced to those users that can be held accountable for their actions. Now, when you look at, so when you have that placemat open, if you double click on one of the cells that has that control, then this, these areas will pop up. And there is documentation for Microsoft that goes even deeper, and I'll show you where there's built-in guidance from the compliance side with Defender for Cloud. I'll show that here in a little bit. But a lot of times what you're not going to find is, make sure you put this setting on. There are some things in Compliance Center, there's some other tools, but I'm going to give you the answer that everybody hates, every consultant loves. It depends, right? It depends what you're deploying, how you're configuring it, how you're doing your logging. If you have an application, people log into it with the username and password because you built a homegrown application. Where does that get logged? Sure, you could extend it in order to go to the event viewer. Sure, you can extend it to actually go to log analytics. Sure, there's a lot of things to go, so it really depends. But if we just look at the servers themselves, and then later on about the applications and services, we really need to put the pieces in there so we can identify. One of the challenges that we see a lot with customer environments is that, again, you've done all the great things and have these other tools, but one, from a security perspective, and by security, it's not about turning on security, it's about handling issues and digesting it and working through them when there is an issue. And when there's data that's disconnected, like, oh, we use Manage Engine for this over here, we use this other login engine for over here, we have this other SIEM solution, but how do you see all of them? So during so one common thing is security and compliance are related, but they're not the same thing. So, trying to unify that becomes easier in terms from an auditing perspective. From a management ongoing perspective, there's some benefits as well. But, just in this case, you're starting to get some guidance. Here's a control, here's kind of Microsoft's recommendation. But again, it's not really super solid. And you can see it's talking about Office 365. So that sometimes get confusing. Oh, one more thing to point out. Here in the responsibility area, you see, shared coverage. So in this area, Microsoft is participating in this because they also have to have that. Because, at the end of the day, there's a piece of hardware someplace. Who has access to that hardware? Who logs into those computers? Who has that? So all of those pieces, Microsoft has to do their part as well as the customer. You can put servers wherever you want. Microsoft say, hey, we've done all of our part. You don't configure the auditing, the logging, the tracking as you need to pass audits. Well, that's your problem. So there is a bit of a share, what you have to configure and share. And this is another good one. This is one really calling out to review and update the logged events. So as you're starting to collect this information from a security, people log on to servers, people make changes to servers. If they're changing the policy of how it gets updated, when it gets updated, what do we collect, so there's a lot of things that are in your hands as the customer to make sure that those things are not only happening, but that they're being reviewed. And when you think about log reviews, there's so much that's inside of Sentinel. There's so much inside of log analytics and workspaces, and it's all great stuff. If you're a data person, it's it's a nirvana of information. But you still need to be able to organize and be able to view that. And not in this session we're going to cover through it, but one of the things is you can collect all of that great data into log analytics workspace, but you can also pair it with Power BI that can directly talk to it live with live data so that you can start to organize the data that you want to have in a review. And then once you Power BI-fy those things, you can actually have that report not only run live, but also send a digest, a snapshot on a regular basis as you would need it to. Not every customer has that because they're not doing Power BI, and we have other tools to collect some other information. But the fact that you can get all of that digestible data in one spot makes things easier versus trying to get it from 4 different systems, trying to rationalize it because they probably have different time zones, stamping types. They probably have different ways of viewing the user. This one pulls the SAM account name from local Active Directory, but it's actually this user from Azure Active Directory, but accessing this service is something else. So it gets harder to do that, which only makes audits harder. It only makes it, less helpful and doesn't meet the urgency when there is a security issue that's happening. Okay, enough of those pieces. So let's talk about some of the pieces that are inside of Azure that we would want to leverage. And again, there's a lot more. We'll set up another talk to go a little bit deeper in each one of these areas. And these are services that we do for customers. So, again, as we're saying is that, Azure, in the beginning, long time ago, it was like almost everybody else. It was all about being in there. Similar with AWS, you want to get access to virtual machines and the networking and policies, and the world is great, but I still have all this other infrastructure that I have. And again, I may not need to do it right away. I may need to make changes, whatever that might be. So really the tools that have come out of Microsoft, on the Azure side of it, and there's even more on the Entra, which is the greater name for Azure Active Directory. It's part of Entra, and then permissions management and managing multiple clouds, a whole nother thing. Anyway, the ability to go do this has become greatly simplified and pretty extensible in what's happening. So first, let's talk about Arc. Now, the main goal around Arc is, one of the biggest ones is to really extend, and have one view of it. So let's say I have Azure today with virtual servers that are in there. It's great. That's almost all my infrastructure, but I have servers and data at other places. This is where Azure Arc starts to come in. If you look at, well, maybe I have nothing that I have inside of Azure. We're doing Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Teams, loving all that kind of stuff. But we really have most of our servers on-prem, and there's that whole roadmap. Do we move? Do we not move? Do we do multiple pieces? Just let's start today. Let's say you have nothing that's inside of Azure, but you have on-premise resources, AWS on-prem, a co-location. They all apply. And now I can start to bring them into Azure so I can actually have a view of it, essentially having a single pane of glass to be able to go do those sorts of things. So really, when you start to look at the resources that you can start to have inside of Azure, the other things that you guys get to start to leverage is now many of the capabilities that you get inside of Azure, where you're able to say, oh, there's a VM that we have, well, matter of fact, we have two VMware VSXi environments. It's running, data center on both. Our licensing is good. We have 20 servers here, 15 there. They might move side to side. And so when we manage that, or as we look at policies for that, well, my VM engineer understands what those things are, and he gets me a list or what these things. But if I mix it with other clouds, even within Azure, or again, I have nothing in the cloud, maybe I'm not going to put anything in the cloud. I don't have the same visibility of benefits of the users that log in, the policies that I want to apply. So this is where you're able to start to do those things, and I'll talk about these in a bit. And one of the ones that gets overlooked a lot is tagging. So, it seems simple, but you can have this tagging approach. So as servers are on-prem, you can still put a tag there. You can define them however you want. They're just a pair of information, the name of it and the value, whatever it is. So common one is like owner, Conrad, purpose, development, purpose, a customer CUI data. So you can put tags on them so you can search them. You can, it's easy to organize what's happening. But I'll talk more about how you can actually create, better control. So Azure Arc really is the way to do it. Now, what is the way to really, leverage and use Azure Arc? Oh, let me go back one, I'm sorry. So it's a really, really simple process. There's different ways to do it. It works for Linux. It works for Windows. You can do it as a single device script. Log into root or log in as a local admin, because maybe it's a server that's not even in, there's Windows servers out there not even part of a local Active Directory domain. Run the script. It will then, you'll have to log in when it runs, and then off you go. If you're going to go against multiple, let's say a very, very common one is, I do have a local Active Directory and I do have a bunch of servers. You could create a group policy. You can set it up so you don't have to do automatic, do individual login. It's good for just one little device. But now it can then be applied to all, if you have a group policy for your servers, specific ones, because maybe there's only a few you really need and the others aren't, whatever that is, I would tell you do all of them. Just the visibility to put in Azure Arc costs you nothing. That's right, it's free. Just connecting it, seeing it, tagging it, nothing. As you start to apply other policies, you start to do updates to it, you start to do other venting with it with Azure Automation, which I'll talk briefly here in a little bit. Then that's when you start to pay money for it. You start to use Defender for Cloud, where you're paying for that. Arc, the Arc changes, doesn't really change. But depending on what you use, it will charge more. But just to get visibility is a great place to go start. So setting that up is great. And at that point, there's visibility into Azure Arc, and then you can start to layer on other things like Defender for Cloud. So getting it started, understand these are my devices. So if I'm in your shoes as a CIO or an IT admin, I would really want to benefit to say, I can go into the Azure portal, or if I'm an endpoint manager, I could see all of my devices that people connect into our services. Very valuable, whether it's BYOD or corporate purchase, whatever that is, I get that control. I really want that same level of control and guidance, even if those servers aren't on-prem, and to start to see what I can get from it. So here's a view for Defender for Cloud. There's different ways to light this up to essentially configure it to target which servers that you want and classify. But some of the biggest benefits that you get out of here is, one, there's, as you're seeing here, it's going to look for certain areas, and you get to configure how you want to go do it, including certain type of regulatory compliance ones. There's actually a workbook that's specific for CMMC, so that's really, really nice. And there's other ones that are in there too, because you might need to fulfill multiple policy types or regulatory requirements. And you can target them for specific subscriptions. You can specify which subscriptions or management groups, which I'll talk about in a bit, to kind of put better controls for what you want. Maybe not everything needs to meet that same compliance requirement, but I would dare say you probably want to do all of them. Anyhow, so in Defender for Cloud, now you're able to do this both for any servers you do have in Azure, as well as servers that you don't have in Azure. So if they're in AWS, they're on-prem, so here you can see where it's saying AWS, GCP, wherever those things are, you can do it. So one of the big themes here is if you stay where you are right now, that's fine. You can leverage this. Do you need a virtual network to do this? No, you don't. Do I have to rewrite my policies? No, I don't. Do I have to change the installation of my environment? No, you don't. Now you do got to install an agent on there, and there's requirements, and there's different versions of Linux that it supports, different versions of Windows Server it supports. Yes, there's the requirements in there because it has to talk out to the cloud of what endpoints that it supports. Is this an Azure government? I wouldn't even be bringing this up if it wasn't. So these are the things the tools that it gives you, and it gives you a lot. And so you can apply what you want to what servers, and it's based off consumption. So unlike a user license, it depends on how many servers that are there. What do I want to analyze on those servers that are there? Because I can actually start to collect information about SQL specifically. Oh, there's a SQL database, or I think there's something for MySQL, and I know there's something for Oracle. I want to get that information as well. All again, staying where I am, doing those sorts of things. So Defender for Server really is, now starting to do the things that we have like for Defender for Endpoint, and really starting to collect and protect, what's happening on the servers themselves. So, everybody just thinks, oh, it's like, the just antivirus. Yeah, okay, yes, it's those things too. But now that you get able to put this on this list, some of the nice things is you're able to unify these views. And when you're making these changes in an administration side, again, one of the things is you have to track your changes. Well, as we were making sure that we turn on but it's weird what you got to do. So if you're on, you can set a policy for all of them, but per server you can set it where it's diagnostic settings, make sure I log it. So if anybody built a server, even if you put something on-prem, somebody built a brand new server, it's in your Windows environment, the group policy slaps it on, says, hey, we're going to start to ingest any type of login, failures. Maybe the logins are too much and costly, because every event you could bring everything else in. It's one of the things to talk about. Keep checking what you configure and keep checking your bill, because sometimes some things that are like really, really heavy, like, do we really need that? No, we would need it sometimes, but most of the times we don't. But things like failures, login failures is always a good tip, because if you're having lots and lots of login failures and that's what's costing you money, one thing is, why is it failing so much? There might be an attack and you didn't know it. So sometimes that, those heavy events gives you a tip that maybe there's something that's wrong. Anyhow, Defender for Servers, that's there. Again, apply that's on-prem, do it in the cloud. Azure Arc allows you to see them. You can deploy them. Do you have to have Azure Arc for this? No, you don't. But they fit well, together and what's going on. The other part, like I was talking about before for Defender for Cloud, is the regulatory compliance for this. So if you see, there's some of the ones that Microsoft has. There's more that's being added. There's one for NIST 800, 853, 171. I believe there's the CMMC one. I can't recall if they've updated it for CMMC v2, but because it's all in NIST 800, 171, you're going to have something that there, and it's going to tell you, hey, we see 2 resources that are having an issue. We really should only have 3 owners within a designated subscription. It's a very kind of nerdy thing, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can control that. But it's telling you what this problem is. So now you can actually click on that link, see which devices are, and you can take action. Some of these things that are in there will help you take action for you. The others are just guidance. Go apply it, you may have to wait. I can't remember if it's like 12 or 24 hours for it to rescan and go do it. I think some of these you can refresh directly, but now you get that guidance and you can create reports around it. So if you're kind of a mature organization, you have a compliance team or whatever, this is where you'd want your compliance team to be able to go view and see these areas, pull the reports, get the audited information, and really push on the IT team or developers, whomever, to go resolve it, right? Because this is not a subjective thing where the engineers go, no, it's fine, it's all great, don't worry about it. But it allows you to kind of pair it together. And as Microsoft continues to make updates to this and other capabilities, you get to just leverage on that, and it will export reports for you, so you can, again, leverage part of an audit, even if those servers are on-prem. So again, it's pretty handy, both in security. Again, security and compliance are related, but they're not the same thing. So sometimes we're doing more things to provide better security, even beyond what the compliance is essentially the minimal part of it. Like, you should be reviewing your logs. You should be reviewing your logs, sometimes they're hard. So, a lot of times we talk about logs because that's, the big place where things happen. But you're also able to extend things. Microsoft's gone through a big rebranding of lots of different pieces. And Azure Purview, a lot of times it started off with just kind of, it really was doing a lot of things with SQL databases, which is great. But now it's really been expanded even more so into, so inside of Preview for Microsoft Purview, there's Compliance Center, there's the access to all these different resources, also looking at sensitive data you might have in blob storage. This is really important for those that may say, hey, well, we have a bunch of data, we kind of want to archive it out, so we'll put it in a blob storage environment. That might have sensitive data. It might need to be encrypted and protected further. Before it was like, I'll put in blob storage over there, nobody will have access but these 3 people. So it's kind of security by obfuscation, which is not really security at all. So now you're having these pieces that's there working together. Now this part's not so much on-prem unless you start really thinking about the backups that you're going to do. So if you're going to start to do backups from on-prem, you can put them in Azure. It wasn't a key topic for this session, so it's another one. But that data might go into a blob storage location. So there's another place where blob storage is in there, again, just helping from a compliance perspective. So there's a part where it gets, if you thought it was deep already, just a little bit deeper, and I only have about 15, 20 minutes here left to go through. So there's lots of pieces that's inside of Azure that now once you've wired up with Azure Arc, we're doing our log analytics into the cloud. One of the things that gets confusing is, well, if I have one subscription, which many people start off with, you can manage it kind of accordingly. But and one of the great things, and you saw earlier was, you may have noticed on there was RBAC, which is role-based access control, where essentially I can say this person who is a member, perhaps, maybe I do it by the person or I do it by a group. So group of people, we'll just stick with person, but groups are better. I'll talk about groups. So for this group of people, they are able to manage virtual machines, or they are able to manage our on-prem environment. Now, that might be one of their tasks, but perhaps we want them to manage our on-prem infrastructure, but maybe not all regions, maybe not all types. And certainly the people that are defining that might be the different group of people, some people could be both, but a different group of people that actually define the policies for regulatory requirements, for policy settings, like, hey, if we're going to have a Linux box with SUSE 15, it needs to have this version on it. It needs to have these logs applied to it. I want to define those policies, but perhaps I don't want the people that do VMs to go do that. So one of the things that's a little known concept, so this is part of something called the Cloud Adoption Framework for Microsoft, and a big part of it's the management groups. It's already there. Do search for the portal, you'll find it. And the concept is pretty simple when you think about it, except for one area that's always kind of the head spinning kind of part of it, and is, where does the subscriptions lie? Do I have to have multiple subscriptions? Well, remember, the subscription is really around billing, but it's also kind of the master kind of container of things that you can go do. So this is where I might say, hey, in the production environment, I might have, like in this case, mission critical stuff, data protection areas, maybe that's where my security pieces are. And in these management groups, I can say, all right, well, for my production IT team, they can do what they need to do and all that. But my development team, well, they also need to build applications to test them out or other areas, and they need the same role, but they don't really need the same access to the same types of items, right? So they can do VMs, but only in this other area. So I can attach it by a subscription. You can say, well, we can limit it to have the IT people do it all the time. It creates burden to go do that, but the other thing is you can apply policies. Let the developers do that. We can even limit what size virtual machines that they can have. We can ensure that not only when they have it, that we always apply the security things that we need, no matter what, so they don't have to think about it. Same thing applies for IT people, because it gets hard as we look at all the different pieces that you might do. It could get complicated. So setting up the framework from the beginning is pretty important, and both defining the roles of people that are going to have access to and the groups. Why am I bringing this up as we're talking about on-premises? Because the on-premises management group and the services you may apply for that, because I have a local IT team, they need to be able to access the patching information. They need to be able to look at the security information. They may need to do whatever they need to do there, add new things, make changes, tag virtual machines, but I don't need them doing that to our development applications, our other services that we have in there. So management groups allow us to have the same kind of roles defined, but scope them to a specific group. So that's why management groups are so important. And again, you get to extend this out. So, one thing that's also in here, just a quick note on it is, well, if you have these policies, can't the person that makes policies do whatever they want? Now, depending on the organization, if you're really small, this gets a little harder to do because you really need multiple roles. But essentially, what you can set up in here with Blueprint, which is really nice, is to say there have somebody that defines the policies. They might even be on the same team. So I have one person that's defining the policies, and they go, "This policy is good," or "I'm changing a policy that I want implemented all the time, everywhere." And even if they have a policy access in the areas or subscriptions they're going to have, when I make it a blueprint, they can't change it unless the blueprint change. But here's the thing: you can have one role that defines the blueprint, and another role has to be a different person who can apply the policies. So you can say that that's somebody who tests it out. You can say it's somebody you would say, well, is it a compliance person? Maybe it's a little bit more technical in it, but you get this hard barrier to say that when we have these important things, we define it as a blueprint, we get it tested out, somebody else then deploys it, and this prevents things. And we've seen it to other customers where, whether it was a vendor, an employee, there was an issue, somebody did something deliberately to remove policies and do bad actions. So by setting up this kind of structure to go do this, and it's not like you do this all the time, and as you need to, you evolve those things. These are things we help some of our customers through. But now we're looking at setting those things up because, again, we're doing this for compliance. So this also allows us, when we make change, there's an auditable event. We know who went and did that. Even if that policy we're applying to make sure that we're capturing failed logins from our local Windows server, all of that applies. It's logged, it's tracked, there's a flow, there's an approval process that you go through. When we leverage things like Sentinel is a workspace. Now, one question that we get all the time from customers, and is how many of these should I have? For the most part, one. The only time it kind of makes sense to have two or three. One, if you're doing development and testing and you just need to throw a lot of crazy stuff at it, yeah, okay, that one always makes sense. The second one is, if you have your internal business that's running in GCC high, that you want to send you want to attach the log analytics workspace that it's connected to, you really want to have one of those and one Sentinel. And then if, where you'd create that other one is if you have like a SaaS application or something that's very specifically targeted, and especially in that case, you want an own management group, own set of subscriptions. You want to kind of isolate it, although it's still in your sphere of the tenant. But the data that's coming out of it, the veracity of information that's going through it, you can scope it down and be a little bit specific. If you have that clear separation of business, if you don't, they're just internal line of business applications. You really should just have one. Makes it easier. And Sentinel in that view can look at all the information people logged in with their workstations, whether it's local AD, whether they're only local AD connected device, their local AD hybrid devices, their Azure AD devices, your EMS devices, you have your servers that are not connected to local Active Directory, Linux. You want all that information in one so that Sentinel can essentially digest all of that information to predict, find issues, and allow you to hunt. So that's a kind of a key one. And here in terms of the data retention, you get to define the data retention, and when you set up the log analytics, most of the time it'll be maxed out to about a year. So a lot of times you want to also send it to an event hub or into a blob storage. And we're talking about why we need a secure blob storage, because that might be a reason that you may want to put it here. And depending on, this is something you should check all the time. So as you start using it, it'll start to show you what your spend is. So you might decide, oh, okay, we now want to put more events on, or we want to put less events as we're going through. And Sentinel sits on top of Log Analytics Workspace. The Log Analytics Workspace is basically where, as you can see here, we're seeing users log into something, which would include users logging into a local server or failed servers. So there's a lot of tables and data that gets collected and pushed into Log Analytics, which is kind of the central part of where we're really trying to get to. Because again, I have on-prem servers. I'm trying to meet the auditing. One, are there compliance areas that I should look for? So that was Defender for Cloud. I want to get the logs of all the failed events that we've had. I want to get a log of all the failed, Windows updates that we have. There's a way to do it, Azure Automation as well. But just from here, like I don't want to change things. This is a place where just getting access to the logs, the information, the authentication, all those areas into one spot. Now I can query all of them. And I don't need to actually VPN into a server and use a third-party product to go do that. I know there's other SaaS things that do it, but it's kind of the benefit that you have here. There's a little drop down there next to export, where you can export a CSV spreadsheet, and it gives you a little text file that you can actually paste into Power BI, and then it'll wire directly up to the query that you define. So really a lot of good stuff that's in there. And this is also the data that gets pulled into Sentinel, and there's some existing workbooks that Microsoft provides specifically for CMMC, and it'll analyze that data in the cloud, even though that data came from servers that were on-prem. So, all these things start to really wire up as we go through that. Okay, so I know I talked about a lot of these pieces. This was intended to say, hey, if you're on-prem today, I think one of the biggest mistakes that companies can go do, especially, put compliance aside, from a security perspective, to at least know where all of your resources are, have that in a single view that binds together with the investments you've already made in Microsoft 365 and the configurations that we've done there. Hey, we've already in Office 365, we're already doing Azure AD, we're already doing MFA and conditional access. We already have that. That's awesome. Now imagine being able to have you're already pushing that data in log analytics. Now you can, in that same view, do queries, cross queries. If you're really into that stuff, there's a lot of things that's in there. Power BI is a great way to do it. But having information is what you need during a security crisis. It allows you to also, not in a crisis, to actually see if there's a pending crisis that come. Lack of information is terrible. And so again, no matter where you are on the side of it, so if we're looking at, we talk about the compliance side from placemat, those items that it's related to, like you should do these things, they directly correlate to, we're talking about server infrastructure, what you're going to see from Defender for Cloud, that's going to be inside of the dashboard for compliance. It's going to see those because you have inside of Azure Arc. Well, what happens if a certain, remember, it's all consumption. Well, what if I migrated off that server? Well, great. As soon as that server dies, goes away, you delete it, the cost goes away. There's different pricing structures that's in there. Well, what if it's a server that goes, up and down throughout the week? I believe it'll take that into account. I think the pricing that it does now for many of them is they'll say, here's that kind of the quote unquote monthly cost, but it's based off of time. So, so use it for that. But anything that you're going to go to, you can go do them. And really the main thing is, especially with Arc, try it out. If you can find a non-critical server or development box that you have, you're going to find it's pretty straightforward to deploy it there. Then you can create, if you're doing Windows and you have Active Directory, you can create a group policy. You can decide to target it for specific servers and then put them all. Because again, not only once you put them in there, you get to define all or what type of event logs. So I can have a specific set of event groups that I want for my domain controllers. There's another topic we'll have later on around Defender identity, but still, I can see what's happening on domain controllers, which is different than the kind of events I might want on my web servers or my SQL servers. So I get to kind of shape what kind of data I want to collect, which also balances out what things might cost me from like the data, not so much ingestion, but the amount of data it's storing for you. So all things that you need to look at. And you definitely don't want to turn everything on, say, I want all events, and then look 3 months later and go, why is that bill like $500? Not saying yours would be, but it could jump. So start small. Make sure it's connected in there. If you know there's a particular type of events that you're looking for, failed login events. The one thing to really check on is when you're doing the log ingestions is the data metrics. So it's like perfmon data. That can add up quite a bit. So you can limit that for certain things. And normally it works out well when you're doing under an attack or certain performance areas, but that's a whole nother topic. So anyway, hopefully out of this you understand that you start where you are today, let it extend what you have going on. you know, and start to reduce the amount of, you know, later on you could decide, hey, this is great, we're going to get rid of another vendor, or you can pair them together, whatever that might be. But you know, you don't have to change what you have now in order to leverage what the Azure infrastructure is to better see or make changes to what you can do to meet your compliance and your audit. So again, it was a high level overview. We're gonna have some other ones that goes deeper in each one, but man, that would have taken like 3 or 4 hours to go through it. So hopefully they give you a good primer, and I appreciate your time. And with that, I think we're, you know, ready to hop in any kind of questions. And August, let me know what we got.